Hey guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am Janine Harry, a communication scientist by profession, here to give you communication tips and self awareness strategies through conversation. So, thank you so much for joining me. Now, I was a bit reluctant to create this particular video because I am not a parent, but yet I am coming on here and I'm about to give advice to parents. And I know that a lot of people who know me personally may say something like, well, because you are not a parent, you are in no position to be giving parents advice. And I totally understand that because sometimes we do need direct experience with something to actually be giving advice. But I also believe that if your advice holds some sort of value, then why not, hey? So, in today's particular video, I will be discussing a parent's responsibility in preparing their kids for the educational context. So, let's get right into it. Now, when thinking about the discourse within the context of classroom education, it is no surprise that by now we do know that classroom contexts are getting quite a bad rep. And there are so many reasons as to why the educational space is getting a bad rep. But for the scope of this particular video, I will be touching on three aspects of this. So, firstly, throughout the years, parents have been getting tons and tons of complaints about the disruptive and fidgety kids in class. I remember growing up and having my own mom get complaints about my brother. I was more of the, quiet kid who was quite attentive, and my brother was the complete opposite to me. So I remember, being exposed to the ways in which my own, parents were continuously getting these complaints from teachers about the disruptive kid, that being my brother. So on the other hand, also, teachers are also feeling this particular stress about having disruptive and fidgety kids in the classroom. So there's a lot of stress happening on both the side of the parent as well as the educator. Now, from a more macro global perspective, education within the schooling context is seen as the indoctrination of children. And because of this belief that the schooling system indoctrinates kids, a lot of parents are opting for options such as homeschooling or even keeping their children out of the schooling system entirely by having them learn about arithmetic, languages, and other subjects through new novel ways such as traveling, games, and so forth. So, yes, within the context of education, there exists a host of problems. Now, did you know that the transition from home to school is huge? And I don't think that many of us understand just how huge this transition is. Think about it this way: for the first half of your child's life, they are learning things in a very informal way. They're learning things through conversation, through games, through play, through contexts where things are quite unstructured. And then suddenly, at the age of 6 or 7 years old, they are thrust into the schooling system, and suddenly they need to sit at a desk, listen to an adult teach and present things, and have about 2 hours or two breaks, per learning session. So think about this huge transition. In the first half of their child's life, learning and teaching happens almost, naturally, very conversationally, in a very unstructured manner. And suddenly, kids are forced within spaces where now suddenly learning is quite structured. And it is quite unfair of us, to expect kids to adapt to the structure of the educational context when they have not been predisposed to this type of learning before. So, this begs the question: are expectations unreasonable? Is it unreasonable for parents to simply expect their kids to listen and to be quiet within the classroom context? Is it unreasonable for parents to believe that it is the teachers or the educators' responsibility to discipline their kids? Is it unreasonable to just expect kids to adapt to the schooling system? And I will say that for the most part, I think that this is an unreasonable expectation. It is unreasonable of parents to have kids adapt to the structure of learning and teaching that is presented in the classroom context if they have not been predisposed to this. Think about it in this way: if you've never been predisposed to something and you are suddenly put in a situation where you all of a sudden need to act in a certain way and you have had no form of training on how to do whatever you need to do, it is going to be quite unreasonable of people to expect you to do something completely new and for you to also have that expectation of yourself. Therefore, I believe that the everyday dialogue and conversation amongst parents and kids need to closely mirror the structure of communicative practices in the educational context so as to allow a seamless transition from the home life into the schooling system. So let's get right into what the home context might firstly look like. Now, within the home context, teaching and learning happens by default. And I say it happens by default because most often, when parents are giving their kids instruction and saying something like, don't do this or do that, or you've got to listen and you've got to behave, they think that this form of dialogue is just normal. It's an everyday sort of normal dialogue between parents and children. But what they don't realize is that this everyday dialogue also presents itself as a teaching and learning moment. What this means is that when you are telling your child, you have got to listen, you have got to do this, or do not do that, you are teaching them in the sense of you are actually programming that child to think in a certain way and to hold particular worldviews. So the home context does not just represent a space in which normal everyday conversation is being held, it also represents a space in which those conversations represent teachable moments, which allows a child to absorb certain information and to hold particular worldviews. And when we become conscious of the fact that these teachable moments actually happens in the home space as well, it is important to understand that these everyday conversations need to transcend its normalcy. And by doing this, we are then allowing the home context to mirror the structure of the educational space. And I argue then that if you want your child to adapt almost seamlessly to the structure of the educational context, the dialogue and the communicative practices within the home context needs to closely mirror what is happening within the educational space. And this is how we can do this. Firstly, it is important that the rules set forth for kids are not just there to groom kids to be good within the home space. It also needs to groom kids to act in a certain way outside of the home space. Because most often, when a parent tells a kid, you have got to listen, or you have got to do this, that, and the other, kids only understand why that is important within the context of the home. Other times, kids have absolutely no idea why they are being given these rules. For example, they might be thinking, well, mom is telling me to listen, but I have no idea about the actual importance of listening. Dad is telling me to behave, but I have absolutely no idea of what the importance of behaving actually means. Why is it actually important for me to behave? So, therefore, it is not enough that you simply tell your kids, you got to keep quiet, you've got to listen, or you've got to behave as close ended type of sentences. You need to allow these instructions to be open ended. And what this means is that you need to go further. You need to tell the child why it is important for the kid or the child to listen within the home context, but also what is the importance of listening in a broader aspect? What is the importance of behaving in a broader aspect? What is the importance of abiding by certain rules in a broader aspect? Another thing that you can do is to invest in educational resources. This means investing in whiteboards and whiteboard markers, creating presentations and throwing and showing pictures of graphics and visuals. Now you might be thinking, I am never going to buy a whiteboard. I am never going to create a presentation because I'm not a teacher and I simply do not have time to do all of these things. But what you need to understand is that through using educational resources in everyday conversation with kids, the child will now begin to understand the importance of listening, taking instruction, understanding, and knowing when to partake in turn taking practices. And what this means that not only will the child be exposed to structured ways of communicative practices within the educational space, but they will now be exposed to these structured ways of communication within the home space. And when you are predisposed to something within the home space, so in the before event, you are now equipped with the resilience to deal with other type of communicative practices which closely mirrors what you have already been predisposed to. And therefore, we can obviously say that, you know, the transformation then of the dialogue into structured teaching moments need to basically be transformed. So, this means that we need to be mindful about how everyday conversations can be transformed into teachable moments. As I said earlier, this is not simply about thinking that when you are telling a kid you have got to be quiet, you have got to listen, that this is just a normal way of communication between parents and kids. That instruction and that sort of guidance is also a form of learning and teaching. And therefore, we need to transform what we think is a normal form of interaction between parents and kids. We need to transform it in significant ways in which there's more value and in which enrichment is created within that particular communicative practice. Something that most parents forget is that a parent is a child's first teacher. Your child is groomed in the context of the home from day one. And most parents, especially millennials, and what we would call our modern parents, are understanding the importance and the significance of, really understanding their role as a parent, but also as a parent slash teacher, because we have more information available on the online space about this. So this is not really something new, for modern parents, but it is definitely a conversation that we need to broaden and delve into a bit more. So it is really important for parents to understand and to be conscious of the fact that if they are their child's first teacher, then they need to be conscious of the teaching practices. And therefore, we cannot simply call these practices that parents are engaging in as parental practices. We need to go further and also include the discussion of how parental practices become teaching practices as well. And this then will allow for the schooling system to exist interdependently with the home context as opposed to independently. And this will make for a seamless and smooth transition for the child from the home context into the educational space. And with that being said, I would like to leave you with a quote of wisdom, like I always do. And today's quote comes from Rita Pearson. And she says, every child deserves a champion, an adult who understands the power of connection and insists that they become the best they can possibly be. And I absolutely love that. Thank you, Rita. If you've made it this far in the video, I would like to thank you so much for keeping up with me. And if you'd like to further keep in touch, then please subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you'd like this video, give it a thumbs up and comment about how you are becoming more conscious about your teaching practices within the household if you are a parent. If you'd like to follow me on Instagram, you may do so at Infinia Communications. You can also read my blog articles at janineharry90.wordpress.com, or you can email me at janineharry90 at gmail.com. Till next time, much love.